You're sitting in your car in the parking garage under your office building, engine off, hands still on the wheel, staring at a notification that just came through on your phone confirming the transfer went through, the final payment on the business loan you've been carrying for 11 years, the last debt standing between you and a specific, quiet threshold you've been picturing, in one form or another, since you were 26 years old and terrified. You've imagined this exact moment more times than you could count, usually as something closer to euphoria, some version of standing on a mountain in a movie, arms out, a soundtrack swelling behind you. What actually happens, sitting in a parking garage that smells faintly of exhaust, fluorescent light buzzing somewhere above your windshield, is nothing like that at all. You feel your chest do something strange, a kind of hollow lightness that doesn't resolve into joy the way you expected it to, and you sit there for 11 full minutes, according to the dashboard clock, just breathing, waiting for the feeling you'd rehearsed for 17 years to finally show up and match the occasion. It doesn't show up. Not that day. Not the way you'd pictured it. $0 owed, for the first time since you were 26. A net worth that's crossed, with this final payment, into territory that means, mathematically, you never have to make another payment on anything essential again without your actual life-changing shape. You should feel free. Some part of you, sitting in that parking garage, absolutely does. But the specific texture of the feeling is so different from anything you'd rehearsed that you spend the drive home genuinely unsure whether something is wrong with you for not feeling it more completely. The moment you finally cross the line you've been picturing for years rarely arrives the way the picture promised it would. It arrives instead as something quieter, stranger, and far less immediately satisfying than the fantasy, and understanding why takes considerably longer than the moment itself ever did. This is the part almost nobody explains honestly before you live it. The first taste of real freedom, financial or otherwise, doesn't taste like the thing you imagined at all. It tastes, mostly, like disorientation, and the actual sweetness, if it ever fully arrives, takes far longer to develop than any single dramatic moment could ever deliver on its own. You call your wife from the car before you even leave the garage, genuinely excited to tell her, and you notice, hearing your own voice say the words out loud, that even your excitement sounds strange to you, a little flat, a little uncertain of its own size relative to the occasion. She's thrilled, genuinely, immediately, in exactly the uncomplicated way you'd expected to feel yourself, and the gap between her reaction and your own confuses you more than the quiet feeling in your chest already had. "You okay?" she asks, picking up on something in your voice you hadn't fully named yet yourself. You tell her the truth, the honest, slightly embarrassing version of it. You thought this would feel bigger. She laughs, not unkindly, and tells you something that stays with you for the rest of the day. "You've been scared for 17 years, she says. "That doesn't just turn off because a number changed. Give it time." You drive the rest of the way home turning that phrase over, scared for 17 years, because it names something you hadn't quite let yourself see clearly until she said it out loud. The specific hollowness in your chest wasn't the absence of joy. It was the sudden, disorienting silence where a very old, very familiar fear used to constantly be running, a fear so consistent across nearly 2 decades that its absence, rather than registering as relief, initially registers as something closer to loss, the way a room feels strange the first night after you've finally removed a piece of furniture that had been there so long you'd stopped seeing it at all. Fear that's run continuously for almost 2 decades doesn't announce its own departure the way you'd expect it to. It just goes quiet, all at once, and the specific silence where it used to be is so unfamiliar that your nervous system initially reads the silence itself as the problem, rather than recognizing it, correctly, as the actual thing you'd been working toward this entire time. The first week is the strangest, and it teaches you things about the actual mechanics of this transition that no single dramatic moment in a parking garage ever could, because the real disorientation isn't in the moment of arrival. It's in the accumulated texture of ordinary days that follow it. You wake up the second morning and check your phone, out of 17 years of habit, scanning for the specific kind of financial dread you've apparently been running as background processing for so long that you don't immediately recognize its absence as anything other than a vague, unplaceable strangeness in your own body. You go to work that day, the same job, the same desk, and you catch yourself, in a meeting, responding to a mildly stressful situation with the exact same urgency you'd have brought to it a month earlier, before the loan was paid off, and you realize, watching yourself do it, that your actual nervous system hasn't caught up with the new facts of your life at all. It's still running the old software, the specific vigilance built across nearly 2 decades, checking for threats that, as of a few days ago, mathematically speaking, no longer exist in the same way. By Thursday of that first week, you find yourself standing in a grocery store, reaching automatically for the store-brand version of something out of pure habit, and you stop, mid-reach, and actually think about it for the first time in years, not out of any real financial calculation, since the price difference means nothing to your actual life anymore, but simply because you never once questioned the reflex before. And questioning it now feels almost illicit, a specific, small act of permission you're not sure you're actually allowed to grant yourself yet. The first week doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like being handed a new set of facts your own body hasn't been briefed on yet, running the old, careful calculations out of sheer muscle memory, long after the actual reason for the calculations has quietly disappeared. Your old friend Threnody, who crossed this exact threshold herself about 3 years before you did, tells you something over coffee that week that finally gives you language for the whole disorienting experience, delivered with the specific, hard-won clarity of someone who's already lived through the part you're currently confused by. "Nobody tells you freedom is a skill," she says, stirring her coffee, not looking up right away. "Everybody talks about it like it's a reward you get. It's not a reward. It's a completely new set of muscles you don't have yet, because you've spent your whole life building the opposite ones." She tells you it took her almost 8 months before the old vigilance actually started fading in any noticeable way, and closer to 2 years before she stopped, entirely, catching herself running old financial calculations that no longer applied to her actual life. You ask her, genuinely curious, whether it ever fully arrives, the feeling you'd imagined in the parking garage, the mountaintop version, arms out, soundtrack swelling. She thinks about it for a moment before answering honestly. "Sort of," she says. "But it doesn't arrive as a single moment, the way you're expecting. It arrives as 1,000 small moments, spread out over years, each one quieter than you'd expect, until one day you look back and realize the fear's just gone. You don't usually catch the exact day it left. You just notice, eventually, that it's been gone for a while already." Freedom isn't a reward that gets handed to you the moment the math finally works out. It's a completely new skill, built slowly, the same way the old fear was built slowly, and expecting it to arrive instantly, fully formed, the moment the threshold is crossed, sets you up for a specific, unnecessary disappointment that has nothing to do with whether the freedom is actually real. The first genuine crack of the feeling you'd been waiting for arrives about 6 weeks later, unexpectedly, in a moment far smaller than the parking garage, at your daughter's school pickup line, of all places, sitting in your car in a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon queue, waiting for the line to move. A specific thought crosses your mind, unprompted, the way stray thoughts do while you're waiting for something mundane, a passing awareness that if your car broke down tomorrow, or your job disappeared next month, or literally any of the dozen catastrophic scenarios your mind has quietly rehearsed for the better part of 2 decades actually happened, your family would be completely, entirely fine. Not fine eventually, after a hard stretch. Fine immediately, without a single meaningful disruption to how you live. You notice something in your chest at that exact thought, sitting in the pickup line, that finally resembles something closer to what you'd expected in the parking garage weeks earlier. Not euphoria, still, nothing that dramatic, but a specific, warm, total kind of ease, arriving quietly, attached to nothing more significant than a stray thought during an ordinary school pickup, and you understand, sitting there, that Threnody was right. It was never going to arrive as the single moment you'd rehearsed. It was going to arrive exactly like this, small and unannounced, in the middle of something completely unremarkable, precisely because the freedom itself had finally become unremarkable too. The actual first taste of freedom, when it finally arrives, rarely happens in the moment you'd have chosen to stage it in. It happens later, smaller, in some completely ordinary setting your imagination never once considered worth rehearsing, and its very smallness, its complete lack of ceremony, turns out to be the clearest possible evidence that it's actually, finally, real. You think, some nights now, months into this new chapter, about the 17-year-old version of the fear that used to run constantly in the background of nearly every decision you made, and you understand, finally, something you couldn't have understood in that parking garage the day it technically ended. The fear was never going to leave all at once, because it was never installed all at once either. It arrived slowly, decision by decision, year by year, and it was always going to leave the exact same way, quietly, unevenly, in 1,000 small moments scattered across months instead of a single dramatic scene you could point to and say, definitively, this is the day everything changed. You're better at noticing the small moments now, the pickup line kind, the grocery store kind, the quiet absence of an old calculation you used to run automatically, and you've stopped waiting for the mountaintop version entirely, understanding, finally, that it was never actually coming, not because the freedom isn't real, but because real freedom, it turns out, was never going to announce itself with a soundtrack in the first place. It was just going to keep quietly showing up, in smaller and smaller doses, until one day, the way Threnody told you it would, you look back and simply notice the fear had been gone for a while already, without you ever having caught the exact moment it finally, fully left.